So we must do two things, two great things together to encompass that enormous new view that lies before us, but to encompass it within the framework of science, to see it within the whole categorical framework of science, and to see that these two are not separate, but that they are wedded. The bigness of the idea, the newness of the idea, the greatness of it is one with the structure of science, the structure of being itself. So we have this enormous picture that has been building up, and we know the climax of it through the chapter on the apocalypse. But I always feel that we have to, the moment we start new, come together again after we've been apart for a few hours or overnight, that we need to build back up and see where we are coming from and what brings us to the present point. So what have we seen? We have seen the chapter Apocalypse opening with that little book with the angel coming down. Mrs. Eddy begins her text there, taking the 10th chapter of Revelation as bringing the first indication of the essence of her mission and the mission of Christian Science, to bring the book that prefigures divine science. The angel prefigures divine science and has with him that little book open. And so everything begins with thought, with a type of thought, with scientific thought. Thought being patterned by divine science. And then we see that that angel can take us just so far, that scientific thinking takes us so far only. And that we come to a point where perhaps there is a crisis within us, a chemicalization, a bitter belly, and we have to come to grips with an even deeper sense of that principle, the principle of divine science. And coming to grips with that principle has all to do with our total identification with that principle, with giving up our sense of what we want science to demonstrate for us, and of aligning ourselves closer and closer, just as she says, drawing nearer and nearer, of imbibing the primal elements of that principle, imbibing truth and love. As we do that, we see that we are going over that crucial point of the 3.5. Identifying with principle to such an extent that our demonstration becomes the demonstration of life, truth, and love. We're able to measure the temple. And as we take that new standpoint, as that becomes our standpoint, we see that scientific thought blossoms into the spiritual idea. It melts into the spiritual idea. And that consciousness of the spiritual idea is the womanhood consciousness, the consciousness of the woman, the consciousness that can give birth to the higher idea of divine science. And so that woman does give birth to this idea. And we see from the story, and we know from our lives, that nothing can touch that idea. that it is absolutely safe when, as woman, we give it back to principle. We let it be caught up unto God and His throne. That this returning of the idea to its principle then opens up another new vision. A new vision of worshiping God, of adoring God, of seeing into that new heaven and new earth. That we get another new consciousness, spiritually scientific consciousness. And that's the consciousness that looks at the same thing it's been looking at and sees something different. Looks at the same heaven, the same earth, and sees a new heaven and a new earth, because she says it is a scientific consciousness. It is a present possibility that John was here when he had that experience. He didn't have to go through the experience called death, the transition called death. That he had that experience here and now, and that you too can have it. We can have it. As we reach that point of the Gabriel sense within us, you see, as the womanhood nature, that womanhood nature is the consciousness of the Gabriel sense. It isn't any longer building up to. The method of the sixth is the method of truth. It's still trying to build up to love, building up to perfection, building up to holiness, building up to completion. That's that victory over single sins, a single sin, all adding up, but God knows when, to the all, you see. All those single instances adding up to the all, but actually they never do. They never do. There has to come a leap, there has to come a mutation in consciousness, and somewhere along that ascending way, the Michael standpoint will give way. The attractor in the Michael field will give way, and the attractor in the Gabriel field will draw everything into that new standpoint that the woman has, the standpoint of the seventh, the standpoint and method of love. The conquest over all sin, you see, over generic sin. And that's a standpoint from which we come out from completion. We come out from the fulfilled state, come out from the perfection of love, and deduce everything from love. We have a divine deduction from love, a divine analysis from love. And when you come out from love, you have an indivisible oneness. A consciousness that is of the quality that it will be able to deduce, to entertain the higher idea. And so that leads us into a standpoint where we are not grappling with duality anymore. We leave the old heaven and the old earth. There's no more sea there. Can you hear? There's no more sense of turbulence there, of chaos, of duality, of crisis, of two things wrestling with each other. So this is the consciousness which he describes as the state in which God dwells with men, and that man is the blessed child of God. And at the close of that, section on truth and love in absolute Christian Science. We saw that John goes further. He gives the experience of that angel coming. And there came unto me one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials full of the 7 last plagues, the sum total of error, of human misery, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, and I will show thee the Lamb's wife. I will show thee the Lamb's wife. And this vision now is what will lead us into divine science, into the vision of the bride as the Lamb's wife. You can see that it is that same standpoint of looking at something that always looked like something else and seeing it as it actually is. That's love, isn't it? So love looks at those 7 vials full of the 7 last plagues and sees the bride, sees the highest sense of love wedded to its own idea. So let's take that text together. We have arrived at the level of divine science as divine principle love. Actually, you see in Revelation, when you go back and follow the text in Revelation, that John gives all 4 aspects. He gives the Word aspect in divine science, the Christ aspect, the Christianity aspect, and the science aspect. Mrs. Eddy does not take the word Christ or Christianity, but of that section on science, this is what she draws on for her text. Can you see how she's focusing everything on science? She keeps taking the standpoint of science, as though to say, the Word, the Christ, and Christianity are past now. The focus is on science. I don't want to focus on something that's been someone else's mission. I want to focus on my own mission, on the mission of the 6th and 7th 1,000-year period, the 6th leading to the 7th. And so she takes up that great city which John had initially described through the word of life in Revelation, where he speaks of a wall, great and high, a wall that encompasses everything. As the Christ truth, he tells about the 12 gates, as the gates of the 12 angels, and that those gates have the names of the 12 tribes of Israel on them. And then thirdly, as Christianity, the 12 foundations, having the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb, and uniting all mankind into one compound idea. So we had the word of life, Christ truth, Christianity as love, and then John comes to the 4th side, the side of science, divine science, giving the standpoint of divine principle love, and tells about that great city, the holy Jerusalem. Jerusalem is defined in the glossary as follows: mortal belief and knowledge obtained from the 5 corporeal senses, the pride of power and the power of pride, sensuality, envy, oppression, tyranny, home, heaven. This is Jerusalem. Then she defines New Jerusalem. New Jerusalem is divine science, the spiritual facts and harmony of the universe, the kingdom of heaven, or reign of harmony. And so there he is carried away, he says, and he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain. Do we hear now that that is a calculus, isn't it? A great mountain and a high mountain is that great calculus of the four, and showed me a great city. That those four are structured. The holy Jerusalem descending out of heaven from God and having the light and glory of divine science. That's what Mrs. Eddy says, that New Jerusalem, that great city, is that which shows us the light and glory of divine science. Divine science is principles, perfect interpretation of itself, with the love aspect to it, having the glory of God. Having the glory of God. Her light was like unto a stone most precious. Most precious. There we have a stone again, a calculus again. Even a jasper stone, even like a jasper stone, which he says is clear as crystal. But do you recall that in the very first vision of principle, where we had the one on the throne, that one was likened to 3 stones. And the first stone was that jasper stone, and we said that was an opaque stone. And so here he says, now that jasper stone is clear as crystal. That through the light of divine science, it is as clear as crystal. Everything, every level becomes clear as crystal. Every level, you see, becomes just that one principle in operation. Just the operation of that calculus. The light of that city. When the light of that city is thrown on anything, any situation, any level, any degree, even the first degree, then we see that everything is the light of divine science. So let's take the text as a whole, because it isn't terribly long. And I told you that it has the 2 tones in the ascending way, bringing out that standpoint of spiritually scientific oneness now, the oneness of being, that first as love, we have the oneness of being, love wedded to its own spiritual idea. She says, think of this, dear reader, for it will lift the sackcloth from your eyes, and you will behold the soft-winged dove descending upon you. What is that dove? In divine science, in the glossary, it is defined as divine science. So she's saying, think now of this experience of the vials, of seeing those vials as the bride. That this is the experience of that dove of divine science descending upon you. The very circumstance which your suffering sense deems wrathful and afflictive, love can make an angel entertained unawares. Then thought gently whispers, "Come hither. Arise from your false consciousness into the true sense of love, and behold the Lamb's wife, love wedded to its own spiritual idea. Then cometh the marriage feast, because you have entered now into that spiritual wedlock of consciousness where there is no discrepancy, no difference between your consciousness and the consciousness of that divine principle which is love. Love wedded to its own spiritual idea. Then cometh the marriage feast. For this revelation will destroy forever the physical plagues imposed by material sense, because it destroys the material sense. And so it destroys the physical plagues imposed by that sense. So the idea is seen to be inseparable from its principle. Isn't that the tonality that we know to be divine science, especially at the point of science itself, the science vertical, the point of divine principle love, that thought there is conscious only of that infinite one, including or holding within itself, holding in wedded oneness its own idea of itself.